I just took a cross-country trip on America's premier passenger train, the California Zephyr. Hop on board with me as we ride from Chicago to San Francisco and back. Let's go! From the Windy City to the Golden Gate, we're taking Amtrak across the Great Plains, through the Rockies, over the Sierras, and stopping in dozens of cities and towns along the way.
Passengers, taking train number 2, the California Zephyr. That is your train that's pulling in on track number 1.
I've wanted to take a cross-country train trip for several years, so when my senior spring break was coming up, I convinced my mom to drive with me to Chicago to take the California Zephyr to San Francisco and back. The train ride starts out at Chicago's beautiful Union Station. Since we had booked a sleeping car, we had access to the Metropolitan Lounge where we waited until we were called to the platform to board the train. Once on board, our sleeping car attendant, JR, showed us to our roomette just before our on-time departure. The train speeds out of the city and through the attractive suburbs of Chicago, and before you know it, you're racing through rural Illinois farmland. Galesburg is the first of what Amtrak calls fresh air stops. At these designated station stops, passengers get about 5 minutes to step off the train to stretch their legs, have a quick smoke, or explore the area super quickly like I did. You have to be sure not to go too far because you only have a couple minutes or so at these stops, but sometimes you can see some cool stuff. Just before the 5 o'clock dinner seating comes the first scenic highlight of the trip, where the train crosses the half-mile-long railroad bridge over the Mississippi River going into Burlington, Iowa. The muddy water was really rough on this day, with whitecaps breaking as we made our way across the river. We chose to have dinner in the second seating at 6:30, so as the sun began to set, we headed to the dining car for a nice meal. All meals are included for sleeping car passengers, so I treated myself to the Land and Sea combo, which consists of Amtrak's signature flat iron steak and a nice crab cake. If you're riding in coach, your meals aren't included with your ticket and are a little pricey, but all the food on the train is absolutely delicious, and I really recommend having at least one dinner in the dining car on your trip. One of the things that makes eating on the train fun and special is that if you're in a party of less than 4, you'll be seated with other passengers, so you get to meet new people with every meal. By the way, gratuity is not included for sleeping car passengers, so be sure to tip the servers because they work really hard. The coach seats on Amtrak are bigger than airplane seats and recline pretty far to help you sleep, but if you prefer a real bed, there are a couple of different options. On the westbound trip, we stayed in a roomette. This is the smallest sleeping car accommodation that Amtrak offers, and it's designed for 1 or 2 people. In the daytime, 2 large seats face each other, and at night, the sleeping car attendant comes through and pushes the seats together to form a lower bed, and an upper bed pulls down from the ceiling. It's a little tight, but we really didn't spend much time in the room. For the return trip, we chose to upgrade to a bedroom which is considerably bigger. Bedrooms have space for 2 to 3 people and feature a large couch-style seat, a single chair, and a private bathroom with shower. The train has bathrooms on the lower level of all coaches and sleepers that are very clean, but having your own bathroom is definitely nice. The bedroom costs a bit more than the roomette, but if you're tall or plan to spend much time in the room, it may be a good option for you. Dawn finds us rolling across the open plains of Colorado, making our way towards the mile-high city. For breakfast, I had the French toast, which has been a railroad classic for over 100 years. By the time I finished eating, the train was snaking through the city's rail yards and passing by the Colorado Rockies baseball stadium. Denver is a longer fresh air stop, so I had plenty of time to check out the huge platform area before getting back on board the train. Immediately after leaving the station, the train begins climbing higher and higher straight towards the Rocky Mountains. The seats in the observation car begin to fill up really quickly, so I'd suggest making sure you have one before leaving Denver. I didn't do a ton of filming as we crossed the Rockies because I wanted to really soak in the views, and the camera just doesn't do it justice anyway. The train crosses the Continental Divide through the Moffett Tunnel, which is one of more than 3 dozen that will pass through today. At an elevation of over 9,200 feet above sea level, this is the highest point on our journey. The tunnel bores through 6.2 miles of solid rock, taking about 8 minutes for the train to pass through. On the other side of the tunnel, Winter Park is still covered in snow, and many passengers on the train boarded in Denver and other towns to come to the ski resort village. While the train is stopped in Winter Park, there's a fresh air break, and you can even see Rocky Mountain National Park off in the distance. We soon met up with the Colorado River, which will follow for almost 300 miles today. Ice and snow covered the river and the landscape as we wind our way down the western slope of the Rockies. We had to travel slowly going through Glenwood Canyon because there were concerns about rock and snow slides which could potentially derail the train. The sponsor for today's video is my mom. Without her, I would have made the trip by myself and in coach. I can't thank her enough for going with me. Mom, thanks a million. I love you. Glenwood Springs is another resort town that the train stops at where many vacationers detrained. At Grand Junction, Colorado, there's a small store in the station where some passengers bought snacks and souvenirs during the fresh air stop.
We leave this canyon, go into the high eastern desert of Utah.
By far the most underrated portion of the entire train ride is Ruby Canyon. Here the train spends its last 30 miles with the Colorado River before veering off toward the high desert.
The water level in here again is starting to raise.
The open valleys in the canyon provide habitats for many species of wildlife, and conductor Shane took time to point out eagles' nests and other areas to see animals.
Right there, you can see the eagle's head popping up out of the nest there.
The only way to access Ruby Canyon is either by train or river, and kayakers and rafters are known to moon the train as they did when we passed through.
And in the summertime, there's about 150 people. Then we'll make a right-hand turn. As we make the right-hand turn, you're going to see a rock formation out that side called the Three Sisters. You'll know when you see it. It's those red rocks you can see up towards the front up there, ahead of the train. When we get up to that, that's the Three Sisters.
In Ruby Canyon, we cross the state line into Utah and see ancient steps carved into the sandstone cliffs by Native Americans over 1,000 years ago.
Now the state line is coming up on the next outcropping of rocks.
Chicken,
Just
barbecue
on the
pork
high
wings.
train car there, right there.
Baked manicotti and a cubana bowl is our vegan option. We also have a kids menu that has a hot dog and mac and cheese, dessert menu, and a
Westwater is the first opportunity for the river rafters to get off the river after leaving Grand.
From here, the train heads to the arid high desert country of Utah as night falls. The empty landscape allows for views of snow-capped peaks over 100 miles away. We had another wonderful dinner at sunset, meeting more people at our table. That night, a full moon rose over the desert, making for a really pretty view and a really bad photo. By the time I got up for breakfast the next morning, the train had made it to Winnemucca, Nevada as we continued across the desolate landscape of the Southwest. After a less than scenic fresh air stop at Reno, we joined the Truckee River leading us into the Golden State. After a quick stop in Truckee, we were bound for the Sierra Nevada mountains. These snow-covered peaks were spectacular, and sitting on the right side of the train allows for views of Donner Lake, named for the ill-fated party that found this mountain crossing. As the train drifts down the Sierras, it drops down into the Sacramento Valley where we passed by many horse farms, almond plantations, and wetlands. Starting in Sacramento, several state-funded trains such as the Capital Corridor service seen here provide daily transportation for millions of Californians each year. One of the more interesting stops we made in the region was near the campus of UC Davis where several students got on the train. The train crosses a massive bridge going over the Carquinez Strait near Martinez before skirting the edge of San Pablo Bay for about 15 miles. We ended up arriving in Emeryville 19 minutes behind the advertised schedule. Not bad for a cross-country trip, especially considering we were over 2 hours late the previous morning. After getting off the train, Mom and I went to the front to get a picture with the locomotive. Engineer Matt got out of the cab and offered to take the photo for us. We later found out that a few years ago he was the engineer when Amtrak brought a boy named John in the cab for his Make-A-Wish dream. The train itself terminates in Emeryville, where passengers for San Francisco board very nice buses to go across the bay. The bus stops at about 4 locations around the city, making it very convenient no matter where you're staying. Since we were staying near Fisherman's Wharf, we were the last stop. In both Chicago and San Francisco, we decided to stay in hostels run by the nonprofit Hosteling International. Hostels are a great way to save money when traveling. They usually cost about $25 a night per person in rooms of about half a dozen people. The ones I've stayed in have all been really nice, and this one takes the cake. This hostel is located in one of the historic buildings of Fort Mason and has a view of the Golden Gate Bridge. After checking in and dropping off our stuff, we headed back to Fisherman's Wharf for dinner. We saw a nice sunset across the bay and made our way to In-N-Out for a delicious blessed meal. The next morning, we rented a pair of bikes in the park next to our hostel and rode them across the Golden Gate Bridge into the charming town of Sausalito. We checked out a really cool houseboat neighborhood and got some smoothies before continuing our ride. We made our way to Mill Valley on the edge of Muir Woods before continuing around Richardson Bay to Tiburon. From there, we boarded a ferry with our bikes and rode back to San Francisco, passing Alcatraz along the way. That evening, we walked around the city just taking in the sights and exploring the town. Sadly, we only had one full day in San Francisco, so early the next morning we walked down to the wharf for the bus ride back to Emeryville. Just a few blocks from the train station, the bus drove us past Pixar Studios, where the company produces its iconic animated films. It wasn't long before the eastbound California Zephyr rolled into the station and we boarded for the return trip.
Passengers, taking train number 2, the California Zephyr, that is your train that's pulling in on track number 1.
One of the best ways to enjoy the train ride is to sit in the Sightseer Lounge. This car is open to both coach and sleeping car passengers, and seating is first come, first served. We spent almost the entire trip both ways in the lounge car. The big windows just let you see so much better than in your bedroom or coach seat, and it's really a relaxing atmosphere. On the lower level of the lounge car is the cafe, where you can purchase snacks and drinks throughout the trip. There are also tables to eat at if you brought your own food or didn't want to eat in the dining car. We had another day of beautiful weather crossing over the Sierras, and it wasn't long until we had left California behind us.
Discovered that winter temperatures are low enough that it could harvest its face.
After a late evening stop in Elko, Nevada, I called it a night. One of the cool things about the California Zephyr is that when the train started running in the 1940s, the entire trip was designed to see the best scenery in daylight. The downside to this is that the train stops in some towns like Salt Lake City late at night, going both ways. One big thing this video really doesn't capture is the human aspect of traveling by train. What really sets train travel apart from flying or driving is the human interaction. We met so many people from all walks of life from around the world on this trip. Teachers, farmers, computer programmers, a chef, and several other college students. Talking to people at meals, station stops, and in the lounge car just really makes the train special. On day 2 of our return trip, the weather was overcast, and by the time we got to Ruby Canyon, rain had started to fall. I didn't let this put a damper on my spirits though, because I think a train is the best place to be on a rainy day. Back in Colorado, we saw some more wildlife before passing the westbound California Zephyr near Dot Zero. As we gained elevation climbing back into the Rockies, the temperature dropped and the rain turned to snow. In Granby, Colorado, there was a father and daughter playing with their dog who was loving the new snowfall. In Winter Park, skiers were also enjoying the fresh powder on the slopes as we once again approached the Moffett Tunnel. We actually had to stop inside the tunnel because of a mechanical issue with the ventilation doors. Luckily it was quickly fixed, and within a few minutes we were back on our way.
The Moffett Tunnel takes about 10 minutes to go through. Please keep those end doors closed.
Once again, I really didn't film much of the Rockies, but with the snow falling it was a really magical experience. The way the snow stuck to the trees made for absolutely breathtaking scenery, and all the passengers on board were just enamored with the views. We ended up arriving at Denver over a half hour early, which gave me plenty of time to explore the beautiful train station. I woke up just before 3 the next morning so I could step off the train in Lincoln, Nebraska. I had never been to Nebraska before and wanted to check the state off my list, and I also was able to say goodbye to a friend that I met on the trip. The snow continued falling on the Midwest throughout the night and into the morning. As daylight began to infiltrate the clouds, the snowy farm towns of Iowa rolled by the windows. In Ottumwa, a heavy wet snow was coming down during the fresh air stop. As a lifelong Southerner, I really enjoyed the chance to play in this amount of snow, even if only for a few minutes. The Amtrak staff on both trips was absolutely fabulous. The employees all really seem to enjoy what they do, and it shows in how they care for their passengers. Whether it's Patricia in the dining car calling all the passengers love, or coach attendant Lynn singing to make station stop announcements, Raphael in the cafe telling jokes to customers, or conductor Shane pointing out wildlife, the service on Amtrak is just so much more personal than any airline. As we made our way from the farmlands of Illinois to the beautiful suburbs of Chicago, our trip started coming to a close. We ended up getting into Chicago 29 minutes early, which is quite remarkable. Amtrak isn't known for being on time very much, but the key to any trip is remembering that the train ride is really about the journey. As soon as the world goes back to normal, I'll definitely be booking another trip on Amtrak. Thanks again to my mom for such a fun trip. Can't wait to see where the next adventure takes us.